This is Kyle Atwell from the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. Today I'm joined by Leonor Tomero. She is the Center's Director of Nuclear Nonproliferation. Leonor, how are you today?
Good, thank you.
Good. Well, today has been a busy day. Today the White House announced that they've concluded an agreement with India that's going to regulate US-India nuclear trade. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this deal.
Sure. This agreement is the implementation agreement that will codify and regulate trade between the United States and India, and specifically nuclear trade. And it's been, both the United States and India have been negotiating for several months. And so there were several sticking points that had delayed finalization of the agreement, but they seem to have come to resolution on those, but we're worried that the United States made several significant concessions that would undermine nuclear nonproliferation and possibly bring into question certain provisions of the Henry Hyde Act, which was the legislation that allowed an exception in U.S. laws and allowed the United States to engage in nuclear trade with India, but had certain conditions. So it's unclear whether and we're worried that certain non-proliferation provisions are not going to be met in this implementation agreement.
So India is a nuclear weapon state outside of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. Could you explain exactly what the conditions that are threats to nonproliferation are that you were just referring to?
Sure. The reason the United States had to change its laws is because, as you mentioned, India is not part of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. It does not submit all its reactors to full-scope safeguards, which is what you need to be able to access peaceful nuclear trade. So an exception was carved out for India. But what we're worried about is that this agreement, that the deal in general undermines nuclear nonproliferation, but that very specifically this implementation agreement will further undermine nonproliferation and the viability of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. And here are several examples of what we're concerned about. One is that the implementation agreement does not make clear that the United States will stop nuclear trade with India in the event that India tests a nuclear weapon. And this was made very clear in the legislation in the Henry Hyde Act. So it doesn't appear to be in the legislation, in the implementation agreement. The second issue is the United States giving India the right to reprocess spent fuel, and this is spent fuel that would come from trade under the agreement. And reprocessing would allow India to produce plutonium, which is weapons usable material, and so we could end up with India being able to produce and acquire stockpiles of plutonium, as has been the case in the reprocessing programs in France and in the United Kingdom.
And India has actually used plutonium extracted from reprocessing in previous nuclear tests it's done. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it did use reprocessing to acquire this material. But furthermore, it also undermines the United States and international efforts to prevent the proliferation of technologies and really discourage reprocessing and the buildup of this weapons usable material around the world. And we're trying to discourage countries that don't already do it to refrain from acquiring this technology. So this will certainly complicate these efforts. The third issue is that, and what was made clear in one of the provisions in the Henry Hyde Act, was the United States being able to, or having the right to require return of the nuclear fuel shipped to India under the agreement in the event that India tests a nuclear weapon or violates the agreement in any other way, or violates the International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards. And it appears from what's appeared in the press that that the United States has agreed to help India find other sources of nuclear fuel, or perhaps help India build up a supply of nuclear fuel. And so this also might go against the provision in the Henry Hyde Act. So we're concerned about these provisions. Again, the text of the implementation agreement has not been made public yet, so all the information we're gleaning is from press reports. But we are very concerned, and it looks like these concessions to India might further undermine the viability of the non-proliferation regime, and make our efforts to stem the risk of proliferation more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty clear that making an exception for India has the potential to completely undermine the non-proliferation regime and the Non-Proliferation Treaty. My question for you is, what are the next steps from here?
Well, where do we go from here? The Congress is going to have to vote and approve this agreement, this implementation agreement, but it might be several months or possibly into 2008 before that happens. And the reason is that two other things have to happen. One is that India has to negotiate and finalize agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, has to have an agreement with the IAEA on inspections of the reactors that India is placing under safeguards. So that has to happen. And number two, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, which is a group of 45 countries, has to change its guidelines to allow an exception which would allow trade with India. Again, these guidelines prohibit trade with any country that doesn't have full scope safeguards, and that's not part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So these would have to be changed as well. And once substantial progress is made on those two issues, then Congress will be able to vote on this implementation agreement.
Great. Well, this has been Kyle Atwell talking with Leonor Tomero of the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. Thank you, Leonor.
Thank you, Kyle.